Life has a way of humbling the proud and uplifting the quiet. In today's story, you'll witness how a man the world looked down on turned a moment of humiliation into a lesson the rich and powerful will never forget. This is a story of respect, patience, and the true meaning of greatness. They laughed, they mocked, and they poured food on the man they thought was nobody. But that man held the pen that would decide all their futures. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful African story that inspires and teaches life lessons.
The sun burned bright over Lagos that Friday afternoon as expensive cars lined the driveway of the Golden Crown Hotel. Inside, men and women dressed in fine suits gathered for one of the biggest deals of the year, a $500 million merger between Trident Global and Vision Tech Africa. The ballroom glittered with pride. Waiters hurried around carrying wine bottles worth more than an average worker's salary. Laughter bounced off the golden walls, and the smell of wealth floated in the air. But at a corner table, away from the noise, sat a man no one seemed to notice, Michael Adeyemi. He was dressed neatly but simply. No gold watch, no loud cologne, no designer shoes. He looked too plain for that room. When people passed by, they barely gave him a glance. Some thought he was an assistant, others assumed he was security or a junior staff member. Nobody bothered to ask. The executives from Trident Global, mostly foreign, proud, and loud, walked in like kings returning to their throne. Their leader, Mr. Bradley Moore, was known for his arrogance. He loved to remind everyone that money could buy anything, even respect. Bradley glanced toward Michael and frowned. "Didn't know the help sits with us now," he muttered to his colleague. The others chuckled quietly. Michael smiled faintly, but said nothing. He had seen pride before. It was a mask that usually cracked before the end of the day. When people passed by, they barely gave him a glance. Some thought he was an assistant. Others assumed he was security or a junior staff member. Nobody bothered to ask. The executives from Trident Global, mostly foreign, proud, and loud, walked in like kings returning to their throne. Their leader, Mr. Bradley Moore, was known for his arrogance. He loved to remind everyone that money could buy anything, even respect. Bradley glanced toward Michael and frowned. "Didn't know the help sits with us now," he muttered to his colleague. The others chuckled quietly. Michael smiled faintly, but said nothing. He had seen pride before. It was a mask that usually cracked before the end of the day. When introductions began, Michael sat quietly while everyone else boasted of their achievements. They talked about profits, partnerships, and power. Nobody mentioned humility. At some point, Bradley raised his glass and called out, "Hey, my friend, the wine's warm. Could you ask someone to bring another bottle?" The room went quiet for a second. Some people looked uncomfortable, others smirked. Michael stood up calmly, handed the bottle to a nearby waiter, and said, "Please make sure it's chilled." Then he returned to his seat. Bradley laughed loudly. "Good man! That's the kind of attitude we like, eager to serve." Michael didn't reply. He just nodded politely. But inside, he remembered his mother's words. "The proud man drinks first, but the humble man owns the well." If only they knew the truth, that the man they thought was a servant was actually the founder and CEO of Vision Tech Africa, the very company they had come to impress.
As lunch was served, the air in the hall grew thicker with arrogance. The Trident executives laughed at their own jokes, barely acknowledging the Vision Tech team. Bradley, who had already had too much wine, grew louder by the minute. His laughter echoed like thunder. "You know," he said, leaning toward his team, "it's amazing how far we've come, investing in companies from this side of the world." He didn't say Africa, but everyone knew what he meant. Michael kept his calm, cutting his steak slowly. His assistant, Tola, sat beside him, her fists clenched under the table. Then it happened.
Bradley called for another toast. As he lifted his glass, a waiter accidentally brushed against him, spilling a little wine on his sleeve. The room went silent. Instead of calming down, Bradley turned his anger toward Michael. "You there!" he said sharply. "Be useful for once! Clean this mess!" The words hit the table like a slap. Some gasped, others stared in disbelief. Michael looked at him, calm as ever, and replied softly, "Sir, I believe the waiter can handle it." Bradley smirked. "You think you're too important to serve?" Before Michael could answer, Bradley scooped a spoonful of food from his plate, rice soaked in stew, and flung it across the table. It splattered on Michael's suit. The hall froze. Forks dropped. You could hear the air conditioning hum. Tola stood up, furious, but Michael raised a hand for her to sit. Then slowly, he took his napkin, wiped the stain from his chest, and said quietly, "It's all right." Bradley chuckled. "Come on, it's just a joke. Don't take it personally." But everyone could feel the shame in the room, not for Michael, but for the man who had crossed a line. Michael leaned forward slightly and said, "Some jokes cost more than laughter, Mr. Bradley. Be careful you don't pay too much for this one." Bradley laughed again, thinking it was just clever talk. But what he didn't realize was that he had just insulted the only man whose signature could make or break his company's future. The real deal hadn't even started yet.
The laughter died down, but the shame lingered in the air like smoke. A few people at the table whispered quietly, pretending nothing had happened. The waiters looked away. Michael sat back, quiet as always. His calmness unsettled everyone. Tola noticed that he was no longer smiling. His eyes were steady, focused, unreadable. Soon the host of the event walked to the microphone at the front of the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "before we begin signing, we'd like to invite the leadership teams of both companies to the main table." Bradley and his team stood confidently and walked to the front, greeting a few investors along the way. They had already assumed they were the stars of the show. Tola turned to Michael. "Sir, should I inform them you're next?" she whispered. Michael shook his head. "Let them finish their show first." From the front, Bradley gave another long speech, full of self-praise. "This merger is a great opportunity for growth," he said. "Our company brings global experience, while VisionTech provides local effort." The word local came out sharp, almost insulting. A few people from the African delegation shifted in their seats. Bradley raised a glass again. "To partnership," he said, "and to teaching our friends a thing or two about big business." They toasted, smiling proudly. Then the host took the mic again. "Thank you, Mr. Bradley. Now let's welcome the man behind VisionTech Africa, the one who built the company from the ground up. Please put your hands together for Mr. Michael Adeyemi." The name echoed through the hall like thunder. Every head turned toward the corner table. Bradley's smile disappeared. His hand froze mid-air. Michael stood slowly, brushed his suit jacket, and began walking to the stage. Every step echoed louder than the last. You could see the realization spread across faces. Whispers began to ripple through the room. He's the CEO? The same man they mocked? The one they poured food on? Bradley swallowed hard, trying to keep his composure. He looked like a man who had just been told his fortune was gone. Michael reached the front, took the microphone, and looked out over the silent crowd. The same man they ignored was now the center of every gaze.
Michael stood tall, his suit still carrying a faint stain from Bradley's careless act, yet his voice was calm and clear, filling the hall with authority. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen," he began. "I was watching earlier, not to judge, but to learn. You see, character is loud, even when a person says nothing." The room was dead silent. Michael looked at Bradley briefly, then back at the crowd. "Many of you came here thinking you knew who mattered. You saw suits, accents, titles, and assumed those defined value. But life has a strange way of testing the heart." I paused for a moment, then continued. "I built VisionTech Africa from a one-room apartment.
There were nights I coded until sunrise. Days I went hungry just to pay my staff. I didn't have much, but I had faith. Faith that one day African innovation would stand tall, not as a junior partner, but as an equal. Heads nodded across the room. The journalists scribbled furiously. He glanced toward the Trident team. Respect, he said softly, is not something you give to a title. It's something you give to a human being. Bradley's face turned red. He lowered his eyes. The same man who mocked was now shrinking under the weight of his own pride. Michael continued, his voice steady but firm. When you poured food on me, I could have walked away. I could have canceled this deal in silence. But I wanted everyone here to see something. That humility isn't weakness. It's strength in control. The hall erupted into quiet murmurs of agreement. Then Michael said, "We will still sign this deal, but not because of pride. We'll sign it because true partnership requires forgiveness." He extended his hand toward Bradley. The gesture was unexpected. Bradley hesitated, then slowly stood and shook it, his eyes filled with shame. At that moment, the lesson was complete. The proud had bowed, and the humble had risen higher. Michael's mother's voice echoed in his memory. The river that forgets its source will soon dry up. And as applause filled the hall, Michael knew he had done more than seal a deal. He had reminded everyone that dignity cannot be bought, and respect is earned by grace, not gold.
After the applause faded, the air in the hall felt different. Pride had been humbled, and silence had replaced the earlier laughter. Bradley's face was pale. The same hands that had tossed food were now trembling slightly. He stood beside Michael, unsure of what to say. The cameras clicked, flashes capturing the moment of redemption. Michael noticed the uneasiness in his eyes and said quietly, "Mr. Bradley, I hold no grudge. Life teaches us lessons in strange ways. Today, it taught both of us something valuable." Bradley swallowed hard. "Mr. Adeyemi," he began, his voice low, I owe you an apology. My behavior was unforgivable. I let pride blind me." Michael nodded gently. "What matters is that you've seen it now. A man who can admit his fault is wiser than one who hides it behind power." The signing ceremony continued. Cameras rolled, pens moved, and history was made. But beneath the success and numbers, everyone knew they had witnessed something more important than a business deal. They had witnessed character. As the event came to an end, people lined up to greet Michael. Some shook his hand with respect. Others simply bowed slightly, ashamed of how they had judged him earlier. When most of the guests had left, Bradley walked over again, now without the usual confidence in his stride. "Sir," he said, "if you ever need a partner for your mentorship programs, I'd be honored to learn from you." Michael smiled. "Let's build something better together. A company that values people before profit." Bradley nodded. For the first time, there was sincerity in his eyes. Later that evening, when the hall was empty and the noise had faded, Michael sat alone by the window looking at the city lights below. Tola joined him quietly. "You handled that with grace, sir. I don't think I could have done what you did." Michael chuckled softly. "That's the thing about power, Tola. It's not meant to crush others. It's meant to lift them up." He paused for a moment, looking out over the busy city. "People will forget what you wore or how much money you made, but they'll never forget how you treated them when they thought you didn't need to." Tola smiled. "That's a lesson the world needs to learn." Michael nodded. "And we'll teach it. Not with speeches, but with actions." The night outside was calm, and for the first time that day, so was the man who had been humiliated, yet triumphed without bitterness. Months passed after that unforgettable day at the Golden Crown Hotel. The story of what happened spread far and wide, across newspapers, podcasts, and boardrooms. People didn't just talk about the deal anymore. They talked about the CEO who chose humility over revenge. Under Michael's leadership, Vision Tech Africa grew faster than ever. His company became known not only for innovation, but also for integrity. He introduced programs that trained young African entrepreneurs, especially those from humble beginnings, giving them opportunities that he once wished for. One morning, while addressing new recruits, he shared the story, not to boast, but to remind them. He said, "You see, pride can build a tower, but humility builds a kingdom that lasts. Always choose respect. Always see people for who they are, not where they sit." His words carried weight, and the young employees listened with admiration. Meanwhile, Bradley kept his promise. He joined Vision Tech's mentorship initiative and worked under Michael's guidance. It wasn't easy for him, learning to listen, learning to lead without arrogance, but change began to show. In time, they built a genuine friendship rooted in mutual respect. What began with humiliation ended in transformation. One day, during a leadership seminar, Bradley shared his side of the story. His voice shook as he said, "That day I learned the true cost of pride. I mocked a man who had every reason to destroy me, but instead, he taught me how to be human again." The audience applauded, but Michael simply smiled from his seat. Later, as they left the seminar, Tola turned to Michael and said, "Do you ever regret forgiving him?" Michael shook his head. "No, Tola. Forgiveness doesn't make the other person right, it makes you free." That night, as he closed his office window and looked over the skyline, Michael whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude. He had built more than a company, he had built a legacy. And somewhere deep within him, his mother's voice echoed once more. Respect is the seed that grows into honor. The man who plants pride will harvest shame, but the one who plants humility will reap peace. Michael smiled and said softly to himself, "That is the real prophet, peace of heart."
In the end, the story of Michael Adeyemi became more than a tale about business. It became a reminder, a lesson passed from mouth to mouth, from boardrooms to classrooms, from elders to the young. People began to say, "Do not look down on a man simply because his chair is smaller than yours, for tomorrow he may own the table." Michael's journey taught the world that humility is not weakness, and kindness is not ignorance. True strength lies in patience, and true leadership lies in how one treats those who can do nothing for them. He proved that a man's worth is not measured by his appearance, accent, or wealth, but by the grace with which he carries his power. And so, the proverb was born. Pride builds walls, but humility builds bridges that last beyond a lifetime. That is the story of the man they mocked, the man who taught the proud how to bow.